Joining me now is France 24's Erin Ogunkeye. Thank you for coming in, Erin. And you've been following closely these protests, and the video documenting George Floyd's death seems to have sparked an unprecedented reaction from social media. But this isn't the first time that the public has seen images of violence against African Americans.
That's right, Annette. Unfortunately, it's a pattern that's been repeated regularly throughout American history, and this goes as far back as slavery. I think it's interesting to tell the story of the slave Gordon, whose photo in 1863 of the scars on his back after being whipped repeatedly by his master, essentially, made the rounds not only in the United States but abroad. It was an image that was used by abolitionists to say, we've now seen the horrors of slavery, there's no turning back. But there wasn't only that. The images of lynching, public lynching in the United States were public, were used not only by people to say we need to pay attention to what's happening, but also by white people to terrorize black people. So it was a different use of these images. But I think an interesting comparison to make today is that of what happened after the video of Rodney King circulated in 1992. He was a black man who was beaten by 4 police officers. Someone filmed the scene. The 4 police officers were acquitted after a trial, and that set off a wave of violent protests. But contrary to the protests that we saw in '92, they were today they're a lot more mixed. It's in states, all states essentially, whereas in LA in 1992 it was really localized to Los Angeles and mostly communities of color.
But is there a risk that people get desensitized to these type of images of violence? Are these videos the only way to bring about substantial change? I
think it's a good question. I think immediately after George Floyd's death, a lot of people I saw on social media were saying, we don't need to be sharing this video. This is traumatizing for the family. And not only for the family, a lot of public health experts are warning today now that this has serious mental health consequences for people to have to be confronted with these videos, black people in particular. But it does make me think of the case of Emmett Till, who was a 14-year-old boy when he was lynched by a group of white supremacists in the South. He was accused of whistling, flirting with a white woman, and in response, the husband of the woman in question and another family member kidnapped him, tortured him, and killed him. And Emmett Till's mother wanted the photo to be seen so people could realize.
This was in the 1950s, wasn't it?
This was in 1955. And again, the people responsible were acquitted, and that's why his mother had said, we have to see this, deal with it.
Is there any difference to the reaction this time around, though, Erin?
It's a good question. I think what's different already is the scope and size of the protests. We're now entering the 3rd week of protests, and still even yesterday, tens of thousands of people across the United States protested. Not only in the U.S., but abroad. We've seen essentially protests on almost every single continent for people asking for justice for George Floyd abroad, but also reckoning with the way that racial violence may play out in their own countries, which I think is new and positive. But most important, we also have Republicans for the first time in a long time getting on the Black Lives Matter.
And this is Mitt Romney,
exactly.
A former Republican candidate.
Yeah, which is huge. I think unthinkable years ago. But I do think that what's changed also is that solutions are being proposed now and are already starting to be put in place locally. There's the 8 Can't Wait campaign, which is a campaign to essentially say, here are 8 things that we can put into place now to reduce police violence. And there's also, of course, the Defund the Police movement, which local activists have been pushing for years, but is now finding its way kind of into the mainstream. We had the City Council of Minneapolis saying yesterday that they are going to defund their police and replace it with something else. So we'll have to see how this will all play out, of course, in the upcoming presidential election, because law enforcement is an essential component to the agendas of both Republicans and Democrats. So,
and Donald Trump has seized upon this, hasn't he?
Exactly, already tweeting that the left wants to defund the police, defund the military, and saying law and order, which of course is kind of a code word for right-wing parties to say we need to continue down the path of enforcing law and order as strictly as possible.
Erin, thank you so much
Thanks,
for that.
Annette.